Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world joining me today. Today's Q&A is going to be around something called sundowning. And so Lynn, who is with me again today, thank you for joining me, Lynn. She has some questions that she's going to put to me about sundowning, and we'll answer those questions and lead into some type of discussion about that. So, over to Lynn.
All right, so I've been talking to a lot of loved ones, and these are people taking care of their spouse or parent that has a form of dementia. And a lot of them are telling me that their loved one gets fidgety certain times a day, and they're not sure if it's sundowning. They've heard of sundowning, but fidgety and their cognition seems to drop off at the end of the day, and they seem to get restless. So how do you know it's a medication reaction, or how do you know it's sundowning? Can you please help us out here?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, it's important to understand the definition of sundowning. What is the medical definition? What do we consider sundowning? And it's really based on a certain time in the day where people have increased agitation, frustration, confusion, disorientation, and their anxiety levels increase as well. How do we distinguish that? How do we know that it's sundowning as opposed to a side effect of medication? Well, typically it starts at the same time of day for that individual. That's one thing. Secondly, it consists of all those things that I've just mentioned, all those symptoms, all those behaviours. So that's really how we distinguish between the two. So the consistency of it and the combination of those behaviours. So that's how we would distinguish between them. And so what do we do? How do we manage it? How do we deal with that situation? I think we have to look at it from a proactive stance, because there are things we can do that are proactive to reduce the risk of sundowning in the first place. And then we need to talk a little bit about a reactive measure. So how do we deal with it if it does present? So I think if I was to address it in that way, Lynn, do you think that would answer the main question that people are asking about sundowning?
Yeah, because once it's already happening, it's probably too late to do anything to head it off. But do you recommend maybe if a family member keeps a journal to kind of track behaviors or patterns to kind of get an idea? Because a lot of times, a lot of people in these situations also have UTIs, urinary tract infections, which also present as confusion and agitation and irritability. So, like you're saying, they need to have a lot of symptoms or a lot of things happening at the same time. But do you think maybe keeping a journal to keep track of what's happening, especially noting the time, I suppose?
Yeah, it's like everything else. We would always encourage people to maintain a record and see if there's a pattern, and what is that pattern, and how does it unfold, and at what time of day does it unfold, because it can be different for each individual. Not everybody will start to sundown at 2 p.m. It could be later in the day for some people. Some people it might be even earlier, but typically it is later in the afternoon, which is why it has the label of sundowning. So proactively, what we need to be able to do is identify the person's change in behaviour. So as sundowning is beginning to develop, as the symptoms are beginning to develop, the person's body language will change. The person might become more verbally aggressive, more verbally abusive, might become louder. They might be showing signs of agitation, wringing their hands, or maybe rocking a little bit, or beginning to cry, showing signs of anxiety, wringing their hands, rubbing their legs, looking totally disinterested, looking afraid. So you really need to tune into the individual's body language and recognize that it's beginning to change, because it's at that point that you can be proactive. It's at that very point that you can say, okay, I can see some signs of sundowning beginning to develop. So what am I going to do about it? So this is the time to engage in a positive way. This is the time to really make contact with that person. So you understand the individual, you know the person, you know his or her personality and character, you know his or her interests. Does he or she like to walk? Does he or she like to bake? Does he or she like to engage in games, activities, conversations? Whatever it is that you know that is positive and a positive interaction and engagement for that person, that's what you need to be focusing on. So as soon as you start seeing those symptoms and those signs, that's when you need to interact and intervene and redirect the person from that anxiety and get them doing something that is really positive. A jigsaw puzzle, watching a show on TV, watching some comedy show, having a conversation, whatever it is, whatever works for that person. And what you will see is that you have massively reduced all those symptoms that we talked about. The confusion, the agitation, the anxiety will just lower itself so much so that you're able to enjoy and encourage that person to have some positive interaction. If we come across the individual and it is already set in, sundowning has already grabbed the person, got hold of them, and they're dragging them down, so they are presenting with those behaviours that we talked about, then what can we do reactively? Well, again, it's really about tapping into that individual's personality and character, knowing them very well as we do. You know your spouse, you know your relative, or if you're caring for somebody in a group home or a memory care setting or nursing home, you know the person, you know the individual, and you know what works for them, you know what helps bring people back down again from being in an agitated, anxious state. And very often, food is a really good way of being able to get somebody's attention. Food and drink. Food and drink. Food is usually a way in. And then once you've got into that person's, shall we say, bubble, because they're kind of inside this bubble. If you imagine having sundowning syndrome as being inside this bubble, well, once you penetrate that bubble and you're inside there, then you can start to interact and engage with that person in the same way that we do if we're being proactive. So reactively, there is still a way in which we can ease the symptoms and bring the person back down to a more calm level and a calm mood, and we can have a much more positive interaction and intervention with that individual then. So that's how I would suggest we work both proactively and reactively with someone who's experiencing the very unpleasant symptoms of sundowning.
I'd like to add perhaps music that the person likes, or touch. Talk about how important touch is.
Yeah, of course. I mean, as I said, whatever works for that individual, because what works for one may not work for another person. So music might help one person, but might not help another person. Again, it depends on that individual. But music and touch is really important, of course. But if somebody's in a very agitated state, we don't want to be doing that immediately. We want to be getting the person's trust and getting their attention and getting their focus before we maybe place our hand on their hand, or if somebody's very upset, they might accept a hug. As all my patients know, and as people who watch these videos know, I am a hugger. I hug my patients when they come to see me and before they leave. Hugging has a real positive physical and psychological impact on people. So That's a really good question, Lynn. Thanks for asking that one.
Okay. So I think maybe a good suggestion to caregivers is to have, if their loved one's experiencing sundowning, even if they're not, it's probably a good idea to have some type of routine, a schedule of the day, not just keeping track of medications, the whole task-oriented way of taking care of someone, making sure they bathe and all that type of thing, but also engagement, and this plays into being proactive and heading off sundowning before it can take over. Do you think they need a routine?
Yeah, everybody who is living with a cognitive change and experiencing that journey needs a routine. They need that regular guidance, direction. Everything needs to be
familiar,
as similar and familiar as possible. And I think it's also really important that once we have learned the pattern and we've learned the time, then maybe 30 minutes before the person will start to experience the symptoms of sundowning is when we can say, hey, Fred, do you want to go for a walk? Or do you want to go have something to eat? Or watch a movie, or whatever it is, So once we've established that pattern, that typical for that individual, then that is the time to interact with that person. And having that as part of a daily routine is absolutely crucial. And just going back to the music aspect of it, Lynn, there's some certain music that will help people reduce their anxiety levels. There's certain music that has been proven to help. And one of those pieces of music is Cavatina, which is a guitar piece of music by John Denver, I believe, or Williams, somebody like that. Cavatina. Anyway, Cavatina is music that can help bring people's heart rate down. It can help reduce their anxiety levels as well. And another one that has been proven in research is something called weightless. Weightless. Weightless by Marconi Union. That's been demonstrated to reduce anxiety by 35%. So again, if we know that at 2:30, Fred is going to start developing the symptoms of sundowning, then half an hour before that, we can maybe play some music or ask him if he wants to go for a walk or whatever it is. So it might be a good idea to have that planned ahead of time. Television is not always a good thing for people. We know that sometimes TV scrambles brains and has a negative impact on people. So if we can avoid TV and focus more on music, or if the person does like to watch TV, something that is funny or something that is peaceful and calming and enjoyable rather than the news, because I know many people like to watch the news and it has a negative impact on people. So try and reduce that and steer away from news throughout the course of the day. Because if people who are experiencing sundowning in the afternoon are watching the news in the morning, it intensifies the symptoms. It increases the levels of agitation even before sundowning starts to impact on that individual. And of course, we talk a lot about brain health. So, puzzles and quizzes and things that get the person to think and get the person to interact and engage are good suggestions and good ideas too.
So what about if you have doctor's appointments or travel plans? How do you integrate sundowning into what's happening? Because you got to make that appointment, and it's going to be in the afternoon during sundowning, so perhaps making the appointment for a different time of day, or not traveling when that person's sundowning might be more prevalent. How do you adjust?
Yeah, that's a really good and interesting question, that, because if the person is engaged in something and they have something happening and going on, then the likelihood of sundowning, the symptoms of sundowning, are reduced massively, because that person isn't just sat on their own or focused on stress and
The
anxiety
TV
and
or
stuff.
news or whatever.
They're actually with other people, and they're involved in something, and they're engaged in something, whether it's traveling or whether it's an appointment with a healthcare professional. So you'll find that the risk of sundowning is minimized massively. So I wouldn't worry too much about appointment times and things like that, and traveling.
Okay. At what point do you say, okay, I've tried these ideas, I've tried to be proactive, sometimes I get to the reactionary stage of things. At what point do you involve the neurologist or the primary care doctor for help or guidance?
Any time that you're concerned about anything, contact your healthcare professional, contact your provider. Doesn't matter whether you think that this is an inconvenience, or whether you think, as I've had many people say to me, I know this is a really stupid question to be asking. Well, it's not. As healthcare professionals, we would rather you contact us for help and support and guidance if you are having a challenge. Contact us. We're a great resource. That's what we're here for. We're here to help you, to support you, to guide you. And I know it's not always possible to pick up a phone and speak directly to your healthcare professional just like that when you're having that issue. So it's always something to take with you to appointments. If you have concerns, if you have questions, when you go and see your healthcare provider, have a list of those questions and ask, what do you suggest? How do you suggest I work with this? So always ask, no matter how minimal or how silly you think that question might be. We never think that way. We never, think that these questions are silly. We all need help and support and guidance at times, and that's what we are here for. So whenever you have questions and whenever you have concerns, that's when you need to speak to somebody for support.
Okay. I had a question. Oh, as we know, dementia is a neurodegenerative disorder. Does that mean that sundowning will increase as the person moves along their journey? Does it go away? If they don't have it now, are they going to get it? Those kind of questions.
Yeah, again, people are individual, and some people never experience sundowning during their entire journey of cognitive change. People just go through life without experiencing it. Other people do experience it. But it's like everything else with a dementia through a neurodegenerative disease. When it gets to a certain point, it will stop. So sundowning, if I experience sundowning whilst I'm moving through the mild to moderate stages of my cognitive challenge, as I go further along that line, it will go away. It'll stop. But again, that's individual, it's personal, and we all experience things in different ways. The best thing to be able to do is to be there as a support, to be there to observe, and to make sure that you engage and interact as soon as you notice those symptoms beginning to develop. And body language is something that is natural to us at a subconscious level. We are always reading other people's body language wherever we are. We're always reading it. That's how we know whether somebody's going to talk to us or whether somebody's going to eat us. We observe through body language. But we don't always translate that from the subconscious to the conscious. So if we can become more consciously aware and better trained in recognizing people's body language, then it means that you have an opportunity to reduce the risks of that person experiencing those very unpleasant symptoms in the first place. So really tune into that individual, you know, and watch people's body languages. And some people have a natural ability to just know if somebody's energy is changing from positive to negative. We can pick up on that, and we know it. You don't see it, but you know it. You feel it, and that's when to engage.
So I would say that's also a good tip for the caregiver or loved one to watch their own body language, because the loved one that they're caring for has no idea what might be really going on in their lives and what they're dealing with. So when they come near their loved one, especially if they're experiencing sundowning, they need to be very cautious of the way they present themselves, body language wise, not just the tone of voice, but their expression and how they react to the person, and not, you know, rushed and what do you want and what now and what's happening, and, you know, that kind of frustration, which I'm sure many caregivers are frustrated.
Yeah, that's an absolutely fantastic observation and a really good point. Our body language needs to be open. It needs to be reassuring. It needs to be calm. Our voice, our tone needs to be calm, and, you know, keep a nice distance. So if you're talking to somebody or interacting, engaging with somebody who's experiencing those symptoms of sundowning, make sure that you're a 45-degree angle to that person, and maintain eye contact. Eye contact is very important. Not for all cultures. Some cultures don't make eye contact. Some cultures don't make eye contact with figures of authority. So just be aware of that. But eye contact on the whole is a very important thing. And if your body language is non-threatening and it's calm and it's accepting and it's open, then subconsciously that individual will recognize that as being, that's okay, that's reassuring, that's going to help.
They're going to help me. Yeah. So come and sit down next to them, not stand over them.
Absolutely. Never ever stand over anybody when you're having a conversation with them, because, you know, that gives you a
threatening stance.
It's a powerful thing when you are hovering over somebody else. It's a threatening, powerful thing, saying I'm authoritarian and you are minimal. So never do that. Always, eye level is always important. So if people are in a wheelchair and we're having a conversation with somebody in a wheelchair, we should always kneel down and speak to that person at that level. And you know, you see many people, this is a typical thing. If somebody is in a wheelchair and somebody is pushing that wheelchair along through the store, for example, they'll come and either shout at you, because of course when you're in a wheelchair you're automatically deaf as well, so they'll shout at you and ask you a question in a very demeaning way, or they'll completely ignore you altogether and speak to the person that's pushing the wheelchair. And that is a very, it happens a lot, and it's something that we shouldn't do. So whenever we're communicating with people, it needs to be at that eye level.
Will the person on the dementia journey understand that when you, how do you know that they're going to accept that, you know?
Well, body language is an amazing thing, and we all go through our life knowing what is threatening, what is intimidating, and what is not. And, you know, when we have conversations, I mean, for example, why do we sit down at a dining table to eat food as a group of people? We're all even, we're all equal, we're all at the same level, we're all enjoying conversation and food, we're all enjoying eye contact, sometimes we're enjoying touch and all that kind of stuff. So throughout our life we are used to that experience, and that isn't something that is easily robbed by the journey of dementia. You know, our body language is something that accounts for approximately 73% of our communication is body language. Very little is the verbal speech. And if you go back thousands and thousands of years, human beings couldn't communicate very well. We used to grunt at each other. You know, it was a grunt and a groan. But the body language was so important. And that's, you know, been carried on through generation after generation after generation, through epigenetics, through, you know, our DNA. We recognize body language, and we know what is a calming influence and what is not. And people who are living with a neurocognitive disorder and who may have lost the ability to use verbal communication still have a good 70% of communication ability through body language. So body language is really, really important. Verbal communication, not so much. We often find people who have lost the ability to verbalize but can sing a song. So sometimes when you communicate with somebody, you might have to sing because they understand that. They can still sing a song, but they might not be able to string a sentence together and talk it, but they could sing it.
So where can we learn more if people have questions about sundowning or want to know more about it? What can they do?
Yeah, please ask any questions that you may have. Post them on our YouTube channel. Go to my website, drdanielnightingale.com. You'll find information about sundowning on there. And of course, there's many resources now about sundowning. Sundowning is much better understood today than it used to be, and it's more recognised as part of the journey. So there's lots of resources, there's plenty of information out there. Ask your healthcare provider, if you know, especially your dementia specialist, your neurologist. Ask those questions to those people, and contact me at any time you need to. I'm always available. I'm always happy to answer questions and help in any way I possibly can. Please share this video with as many people as you can. Share this YouTube channel with as many people as you can, all the people within your circle, because the more people that learn and gain an education, the better supported people living with a dementia, a cognitive change, a memory issue, that's the better they are supported.
Very good.
Thank you very much for listening to us, and I will be back next week with another really informative video.
Bye-bye.